General George McClellan, Officer Commanding Army of the Potomac, to Brigadier General W.B. Franklin, Officer Commanding 6th Corps, Army of the Potomac, 24th of May 1862. It is my intention to strike southwest into Virginia with a major portion of the army and engage the enemy on his own soil. He will then be forced to give battle. However, I am concerned about enemy forces currently located on the Choke Peninsula and do not want the problem of them loose in the rear, possibly disrupting the Army's lines of communication. Your Corps is tasked with the job of clearing the peninsula. It is known the enemy have an armaments facility at the large town of Hampstead. It currently produces small arms and ammunition, but is in the process of being enlarged to allow the manufacture of artillery. Despite the maritime blockade currently being enforced by our naval colleagues, Port St. Charles, at the mouth of the Charles River, is being used by the enemy as a base for blockade runners. Intelligence suggests that rebel forces on the peninsula consist of at most a small division, but possibly as few as 2 brigades. However, this may be inaccurate, hence the reason you invade with your full corps. That would be more than adequate for the task. Your objectives: A. Capture and garrison the 4 large towns of Hampstead, Port St. Charles, Clanfield and Stockton. B. Capture, if possible, or destroy the armaments facility located in Hampstead. C. Capture or destroy all vessels in port, especially at Port St. Charles. D. Destroy or capture all enemy forces on the peninsula. Your attack will coincide with the remainder of the army beginning its advance into Virginia 1 week from today on the 31st of May. I leave the planning and execution of the above task in your hands. George B. McClellan, U.S. Army. The divisional and brigade commanders of 6th Corps had all gathered in the HQ tent of Brigadier General William Franklin. Gentlemen, you all know our task for the coming operation by the Army of the Potomac. William scanned the face of each man gathered around the table. Many of you have contributed ideas just as I requested you to. Some of the men nodded, others just gazed down at the map spread over the folding wooden table. Taking all these suggestions, I believe we have a solid plan of action. His aide handed him a wooden pointer. Intelligent, for what it's worth. A few smiles and some of the gathered officers' grunts from others. The enemy has no more than a reduced division to defend the whole peninsula. His cane swept in a circle over the map. It will be a 2-pronged assault. His pointer moved to the eastern coastal road. 1st Division, minus 2nd Brigade, will move down this road, through Bourne, cross the Crow River and move against Stockton. This should stir up the rebels, who will be forced to react. That will take place on the 31st of May. The speed of the advance will of course be governed by what the enemy forces, the 1st Division, run into. The whole point of this thrust is to draw in the enemy. Now the pointer switched to the western coastal road. 2 days later, at dawn on the 2nd of June, the rest of the corps will advance down through Peytonville on Meehan. I expect the enemy to be either engaged with or moving toward 1st Division over to the northeast. 2nd Division should then be free to cross the Marsh and Owl bridges and make a rapid advance to capture Hampstead. Once again he scanned the faces around the table. If all goes to plan, Hampstead and Port St. Charles will quickly fall, leaving us free to move north to support 1st Division and destroy the enemy. Any questions? Don Haver and Pat Morgan of the 6th Alabama sat on a couple of old wooden chairs, furniture that must have been purloined from a nearby house or cabin by previous sentries on this post. They were sat by the rocks at the top of Chalk Heights with an excellent view down to the East Road and also out beyond the cliff to the Atlantic Ocean. By the position of the rising sun, Don reckoned it to be close to 8 AM. They would be relieved soon to grab a bite to eat, and if the sergeant was in a good mood, a couple of hours of shut-eye in their tent. They'd been awoken at 4, grabbed a hot coffee, and made their way to this post before first light. As the sun rose, the land and sea slowly became visible, as did a small cabin down beside the East Road. Once Don and Pat could clearly see the road, the latter had climbed on top of one of the rocks and waved his hat. Down beside the cabin, a tiny figure waved back, the signal for the night patrol who had guarded the eastern entrance to the peninsula to return up the slope to camp. Don and Pat had watched the dozen soldiers and 2 horses make the long climb up the slope. Very little moved on the road after dark. It was all too easy to stray off the road and fall off the cliff into the ocean. The lieutenant, sergeant and 10 men had the job of stopping and checking anyone brave or foolish enough to travel the road in the darkness. The 2 horses were to be ridden the 6 miles to Bain and the telegraph office should the enemy attempt to travel the road. Those 12 men would now be well fast asleep, thought Don, as he lifted the telescope and focused on the road. Not a damn thing had come south since dawn, which was unusual. The mail coach as well as supply wagons would normally have passed by now. Some riders and a small pony and trap had moved north en route out of the valley, as well as 2 men with a team of oxen pulling a large wagon loaded with timber. He swung the lens upward slightly, and the water of the Atlantic Ocean came into focus, the sun causing the gently rolling waves to glisten and shine. Eventually the glass stopped on a ship, about 5 miles offshore, nothing unusual. The Yankee frigate was always there or thereabouts, preventing the use of Stockton, the small port at the south end of the North Inlet. As far as Don could tell, it was the same frigate as had been there for the past 8 or 9 days. Not a large ship, probably no more than 28 guns, but big enough to cause trade in and out of Stockton to cease. Another frigate would be stationed further down the coast, doing the same job at Port St. Charles. Is that another of them, their Yankee frigates, Don? Pat's voice interrupted his thoughts. He lowered the glass and looked to where Pat was pointing. Another ship had come into view to the north. He quickly located it with the scope. Once settled and in focus, there was no mistaking the flagship flew, the Yankee Stars and Stripes. This was a larger ship, though still a frigate. This one had 2 decks and more gun ports. He handed the scope to Pat and fished out the logbook and pencil from his pack. They had been instructed to note any ship sightings and movements, as well as watching the road. The information would be passed into the Navy. This vessel was probably here to relieve one of the ships patrolling off the peninsula, or simply heading further south on other duties. Horses and riders, Don. Lots of them. Don quickly put the pencil and book down and looked at the offered glass. Swimming into the lens were horsemen. They were on the road and fanned out along the lower slopes. More importantly, they were wearing blue uniforms. The leading horseman on the road stopped some distance from the cabin used by the night shift. The men dismounted, drew carbines from their holsters and advanced towards the empty cabin. Pat, run and find the sergeant and lieutenant. Ask them to come as quick as they can. Tell them Yankee cavalry on the East Road, probably a full regiment.